Welcome back, everybody. This is podcast number 22, and we had a little break, and now we're back to business, and we're going to talk about how nostalgia is used in advertising to connect with consumers and the techniques and tactics that they use.
And this is a topic that's very dear to my heart, but also it's something I've written about in my academic career.
You did it as a thesis, right?
Yeah, I did my bachelor's thesis on nostalgia as a psychological force, which, by the way, the university was like, this is too psychology oriented, not enough business orientation. And little did they know I'd put all the proof in front of them.
Wow, so they're like, this is not marketing.
No. The guy they handed it to was like a accounting professor. He did not know anything about like that kind of research.
I had a very similar thing with my thesis because it was about how to manipulate search engines into finding what you are communicating. So pretty much keyword research, and they said this is not marketing. I'm like, okay, never mind.
Old folks stuck in the past.
Exactly. Oh my god, I have some weird news that is actually regarding marketing, so we'll get there, and I'm very curious to hear your opinions about some of the things.
For sure. But before we get to the main topic, we always do news, but you can forward ahead to the main discussion. We're gonna start off with a bit of economic news.
Go ahead.
So, tariffs in the US.
Yes, that was my first topic.
So backlash all across Europe, and a whole bunch of different countries are saying that they're going to retaliate properly. And Emmanuel Macron called them brutal, unfounded, and certain to have a massive impact on the European economy. One of the big things is most Americans are reacting with horror. There are certain people who are just Trump cultists who have decided that, oh, we don't need everything to be imported, we can grow our own stuff. And I'm just like, you can't grow bananas and you have a country the size of a continent.
That's true. I've also, regarding the tariffs in Canada, do you know that actually the Senate voted to block the President Trump's tariffs to imports from Canada? So basically he's like, I'm gonna import, do these tariffs and I'm gonna enforce it, blah blah blah, but actually the Senate is like, nope. So this vote occurred shortly after he announced this, because obviously everyone started freaking out that, you know, the goods and can really increase the prices of cars, or maple syrup went in price at 300%. So that makes no sense. So obviously there's economic impacts. Canada is also an ally, and that was something that the Senate discussed. And that thing he said about the fentanyl, that is like, oh, it's all comes from Canada. I've seen there's a research somewhere that it's like 0.001% actually is being smuggled or something through Canada.
And a slightly higher but still insignificant number from Mexico. And but that's because they can't bite the hand that feeds, which is pharmaceutical companies. So they'll never say, we need to stop the fentanyl crisis from our own companies, and, you know, they'll end up sounding like communists. Even aside from that, that's just a pretext. They just don't want immigration.
Yeah, for me that's very interesting how they just decided that, you know, this is going to be the long list. And I've seen a video somewhere, the guy said that the tariffs were even calculated wrong. There was an interview by The Economist who's like, I used ChatGPT for it.
Yeah, I was going to cover this, and for a lot of people are saying, haha, this is what you get when you use ChatGPT. And you know me, I'm not the biggest defender of AI. I like to have an even keel, but that's not exactly what happened. I was going to cover this because Mike Masnick had something on Tech Dirt that broke down the entire saga and just covered what each step was in their thinking. So yes, while they did use AI, we don't know which one. They probably used Grok, by the way, because, you know, Elon is the baby daddy for all these people as well. And so what happens is they went in, and Donald Trump wanted to justify tariffs because he wants to look like a strong man in front of the rest of the world, which is his strategy, you know. It's a common strategy in politics in general, but he didn't have a justification. He just really wants to be like President McKinley from the past. And he really, I don't know, somebody told him about him, and told him that you should model your policy after this guy. And one of the big things he did was put a ton of tariffs and do a lot of trade blockages and things like that. So his team had to scramble together and run up and find a pretext for this and calculate numbers for each country they wanted to tax. So a lot of people were wondering, why is there a 10% tax on places that are uninhabited? And the reason for that is they put a baseline as 10%. The tariff needs to be minimum 10%. So they entered that as a parameter into ChatGPT or whatever they were using. And then they said, this is the amount they get from us, and this is the amount we take from them. Divide this number by this number, which is not how that's supposed to be done. It gave me a heart attack looking at that, and somebody who studied a basic econ. So they basically, even every AI people who were researching this entered it into. It told them, yeah, but don't do this. So even the AI was like, yeah, this won't produce good numbers that are useful for anything.
I've seen that they basically presented it as a trade volume. So basically, we trade with. So for example, there was a island somewhere that is like the poorest island ever. It has diamonds. And they said, so this island has diamonds. So what it imports from US is worth 7 million, and what it exports is like 220 million. So they're like, it's very unfair trade. So he's like, let's impose tariffs on that. He's like, but that's not the formula, right? It's the country that doesn't have so much money and economy.
It's not even that. There's a basic misunderstanding about what deficit means among regular people. It's sort of like if you go to a store and
Right.
you buy something from them,
Yeah.
and you feel cheated because you gave them money, but they didn't buy anything from you.
That's kind of what he's thinking about, right?
So the entire concept of comparative advantage, they won't understand it. What they want is for U.S. goods to be sold back, to even out the deficit and the surplus.
Or I've seen one guy, he's like, we're going to rebuild the economy. So now, as you said at the beginning, that we're going to grow our own bananas. But in reality, I think I was reading on Reddit somewhere, like the guy is like, I'm into logistics. He's like, this is never going to happen. We're never going to build factories. Like, we're not going to manage to build all the factories to produce manufacturing internally in 4 years. He's like, we're going to sit it through. Basically the Senate or basically the government, the White House is going to change again, rotate to someone who's more reasonable. Yeah. And then we're going to just, release the tariffs, and it's going to go back to normal. He's like, we're not going to build an economy from scratch for things we don't produce or don't manufacture.
Yeah. On that note, I have two things I want to say. One is an illustrative example. The other is another deep misunderstanding about economics. As we covered that the U.S. aid office was shut down a while back, right?
Yep.
So the second the U.S. aid office was shut down, they were hailing it as some sort of victory. What happened was that created a gap where China came in and started making deals with all countries who needed that aid. And it became a crucial loss in America's soft power, something like that happens when the tariffs happen. Because another country will be like, oh, this is my opportunity. I may not have the same quality service sector, but when the US prices go up, I'm just going to swoop in and take all their business. So this idea of waiting 2 years to so things go back to normal, no, they won't go back to normal. There'll be somebody else filling your slot, and then you'll have to compete with them as they've been growing.
That's a very fair point.
The other thing I wanted to point out was this was the Twitter exchange that I saw, and it drove me insane because somebody was like, maybe this is they linked to a story, and they were like, the Nintendo Switch 2 in the US will be priced like $600+.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
So somebody else was like, maybe this is an opportunity to get Nintendo to come to the US and manufacture it here. And
oh my god. Some people are just dumb.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Businesses just sprout out of the ground. They happen like instantly or something.
Yeah, let's just start producing Nintendo just like that in US.
Yeah,
then it's gonna cost like $3,000, just like the Apple did with their VR set.
I messaged you yesterday about that movie, Blackberry.
I watched it yesterday.
Oh, did you?
Yes, I'm like, yes, I'm like, I checked it. I'm like, I need to watch it.
That illustrates how complex it gets to manufacture anything.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie. Somehow I missed it. I didn't know it even existed, but somebody pointed it out to me, and it was great. But you saw in that movie the massive supply chain issues that are caused not just by the company itself, but by these complementary providers and all of the telecommunications infrastructure that's needed.
That's true. It's just like it's not fitted. Like you have to be very careful with that. But now, obviously, the stock market rolled back. I've seen like a year back, like S&P 500 and stuff like that. People are panicking. People are selling.
It's the lowest it's been since the 2008 financial crash.
I mean, the dip. You mean?
Yeah.
I mean, COVID as well. I think they exclude COVID or something. But
even during COVID, there were certain goods that were rising up because they would suddenly be very necessary. This is just causing a lot of crashes. On that note, there are 4 goods that stood out.
Go ahead.
Really did not take a dip, but actually took a rise.
What was it?
Oh, well, I was trying to get you to guess, but it's coffee.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Nicotine. Soup.
Soup.
Because that's cheap and you can buy it in cans.
Okay.
You know, I bet people are stockpiling, you know. And a beer.
So like basically everything that is a stimulant, and then soup is the only.
Yeah, soup is the one that's like I'm spending money on stimulus and then I'm just gonna eat soup.
Yeah, literally new diet. Well, I have no idea how this is gonna turn out, but to be honest, let's see if this actually is gonna, how many businesses are gonna collapse and how many businesses actually start gonna grow. Talking about businesses, have you heard of the late stage bid for TikTok by OnlyFans founder?
Fake? And now that you mentioned the OnlyFans founder, but yeah, I saw a headline about this. I thought it was an April Fool's joke.
No, it didn't really happen. So it's actually a crypto news. So what happened? So TikTok obviously is facing a mandate to be sold in US, and now there's bidding wars going on, and it's actually the deadline was 5th of April. So the late stage bid came from Tim Stokely. He's the founder of OnlyFans. However, he has this new venture that he called Zoop. And the H Bar Foundation, it's a cryptocurrency in UK actually. So they basically are kind of joining forces. So the guy who founded OnlyFans has this Zoop company that he wants to use as a purchase mechanism because he doesn't want like headlines that, hey, OnlyFans bought TikTok, because that's gonna be like very bad press. But the Zoop company, I think their focus are more like videos for family-friendly content, and then HBAR is a cryptocurrency technology, like a blockchain technology that basically says, oh, you can do all the transactions here. So that means they fly under the radar. They don't need payment systems, and all the donations and payment systems can go through crypto, which is pretty crazy for me. But the strategic rationale is like, hey, we can have our own internal payment system, and we don't have to like get charged by banks in between. So what decentralization actually in finance or in cryptocurrency is doing. So this bid is facing a lot of competition, obviously, because Amazon and Oracle, they're also bidding to buy TikTok. But obviously I think that the OnlyFans founder is not going to have success in this, but the idea is interesting. So the bid depends on satisfying the US regulation as well as the concerns, right, that they had for the national security and data privacy. So the White House is playing like a significant role when it comes to decision making for this process.
No.
But for me, that was just funny that, hey, OnlyFans wants to buy TikTok. And then I went deeper. It's like, oh, there's actually a cryptocurrency that is also like sponsoring him, and they joined forces to make this like, oh, now you can donate to your OnlyFans and TikTok, whatever person, without actually triggering any financial hurdles.
It would also make it really easy for people in certain countries to be able to bypass the rules.
That's it as well.
Like there are like sort of blocks on all sorts of banks that you can't pay for this thing, can't pay for that thing.
That's true. Well,
Mm.
cryptocurrency is still like regulated very hard in US. I know that banks are still not like allowing some banks like Citibank, I know in US is not allowing to buy cryptocurrency. And I was reading somewhere on Reddit, there's a guy who's like, "Oh, my friend works at Citibank," and I taught him about like Bitcoin, and he's like, he cannot buy it. They literally say, if you buy this, we'll kick you out of the company. So it's like very strict rules.
Yep. That's mainly because a lot of bankers were using that as a secondary loan market.
Yeah, as well.
Madon. Like, in fairness, that just seems like a standard American contract. You know why?
Why?
My friend worked at Domino's,
All right.
and they wrote in this contract. This was in New Jersey, that if he bought or praised another pizza chain, he'd be fired.
It's like non-compete. You cannot work for New York anymore. You're gonna mention New York. You're gonna pose there. You're gonna eat there.
No, he was at Domino's.
Oh my God.
He used to have to order Papa John's, but he would tell me that every time.
Can you please order Papa John's for me? Just Domino's subs.
That was it. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. What else do you have?
Columbia University is facing a massive backlash after a huge spate of strange decisions they made alongside their board of directors about student protests and who does and does not get kicked out. And now, a admissions consultant is saying students who aren't accepting offers from the university. So they got accepted, and they're like, "Nah, don't want to go. We've seen how you treat your students."
And I mean, and what then? So basically, students are withdrawing applications. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, withdrawing admissions, not even just applications. So this is like more of marketing news, in my opinion, because Columbia made a decision. They were like, "Oh, these protests make us look bad. Let's fire the students who organized them, kick them out of the university, rather."
Wow, this is crazy.
Yeah, and they did, and okay, the faculty at Columbia University are like old heads. They don't understand what people's values are. They're all very sort of bougie liberal types.
Uh-huh.
So, and those people tend to be very, pro a certain country, and anti another certain country being occupied by that other country. And what happens is, when students protest, they think, oh, it's perfectly safe for us to clamp down on these people and make a show of strength and solidarity. And they misjudged that the public actually felt the opposite. So what happened is, it's affecting the impression of the university. It's damaging admissions. The reason I bring this up is it's also illustrative of what universities actually sell. They actually sell their own prestige. They don't sell you a better education than another university directly. You would never know if it was better or worse. They might have better facilities, certainly, but those facilities happen because they have the prestige. And all of these universities, if they start losing their reputation, they suddenly lose everything.
They also lose money, right? No one wants to go there. I've met a guy. He was from I think Argentina, and we spoke about cultural differences. And one thing that he told me, in terms of like what's the difference between Argentina, because he grew up obviously like in not in a rich family, that they ask you which school did you go to. It's like that's your first introductory question when you meet someone new. It's like, oh, which school did you go to? I compared it to an equivalent in the Netherlands. Where do you work, right? So I can put a label on you and a staple on you, and that's where our conversation is gonna kick off. So yeah, I totally understand on the like university labeling, and I think this is gonna be a little bit of a downturn for them.
Yeah, but they'll probably do a bunch of PR, and also people's memories are really short. If they don't do anything really massive to mess up their PR in the future, yeah. But I don't think Muslim students will forget.
Fair, very
Yeah.
fair points.
That said, you got anything else?
Yes, my last news was about ageism in marketing. So basically, it's like age discrimination. And there was like a new research released. So basically, the definition of ageism, for everyone who doesn't know, is a basically involves stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination based on age, affecting both older and younger individuals
Mhm.
through more commonly impacted like older workers. So it manifests itself in insufficient representation of the reinforcement and outdated stereotypes in marketing materials or basically industry itself. For example, if you go to finance, you're like, these guys are that, right? It's like a bunch of bald old dudes, which I literally, that's my stereotype. But in this case, it was about marketing. And they said that only 6.2% of advertisers in the UK are 50 or older.
Huh.
This is crazy. I like, and then you think it's like, oh, marketing exists for such a long time, but now because everything's digital, no one's hiring basically people who are older than 50 into the marketing field.
That's
So
true.
in 2022, only 4% of people worldwide ads were aged 60 or older. So like basically,
It's also sort of a young people's game in the beginning, you know? Your marketing job is the first one, then you might move on to like logistics or growth or something like that. Or start your own company.
they could be, but for me, it's more about like it's very interesting that, well, ageism can also go the other way, right? So you can go say, "Oh, you're too young to understand this," even though, let's say, give an iPad to a kid, I don't know, Gen Z, whatever, not a kid, but give it to a grandma who's gonna figure out it faster, right? So that's also ageism in a way. Who you would get into a workplace, working remote, that's also is affected.
But
So obviously the benefits, like there are also programs actually in US. In one of the states, I don't remember which one, there is a program that is fighting ageism in workplace, and it starts from age 40. So like if you're 40, you could actually claim being discriminated if you're not being hired for a specific job.
soon, Alex, soon.
I'm closer to 40 than 20, so maybe I need to change careers now before I get discriminated. So yeah, it's like a common stereotype that includes, older workers being like technologically like lame, inept, stubborn, slow, resistant to new ideas, conservative. So there's also like a bias, towards the youth that they're like, oh, they cannot sit down and just do work, they're lazy.
They want their avocado toast.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, and that's where like so this basically the research said that there's costs to this, obviously, because some companies they exclude employees and the kind of people that actually have the skill. There's legal protection now that is being implemented more and more, and there's obviously like strategies of mitigation, and they basically mentioned that like you have to basically train yourself, practice yourself for bias, but again,
No,
nothing here in the research said about like actual skills. It's about perception and perspective on the problem. Like
no.
that's how they basically said you should fight it. So that was very interesting. This is more of a maybe research. It can be a topic on itself, but it was for me like, oh wow, they finally recognized this as like, oh, there's a problem. We should create a department that is gonna fight against ageism. I'm like, okay, cool. And now you have laws to protect that.
Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to ageism, I was expecting something of you to go down a different road.
Really? Why?
I thought you were gonna say in the actual marketing, like in the marketing content or something, where old people aren't represented or young people of a certain age group aren't represented.
No, that's more targeting. Like that's already like a post factum. Like yeah, it's a marketing campaign. No, but like in marketing roles, that was interesting for me. They also mentioned, and maybe last thing, the in terms of economic disconnects, they said that despite those over 60 holding 25% of global spending power and over 50s in the UK accounting for 54% of consumer spending, only a small fraction of advertising budgets basically are like for these demographics. So basically, no one advertises for old people as well.
Yeah.
Like basically, the whole advertising is focused on people until like 50, which is interesting. But then obviously, if you're like you don't know how to use an iPad, they're like, oh, I'm not gonna advertise. That's like a different way of.
Yeah,
Uh,
there really is a massive gulf right now, and it's swaying towards digital, but like physical media is so much more targeted towards older people.
yeah, true.
And we're just easily reachable by any digital means.
Being on the couch and
Yeah.
scrolling. How can you reach me? Just message me, right?
That's it. Are we moving on to the main?
Let's do the main topic. How nostalgia is used in advertising and how it is used to connect with consumers. I have a definition.
Perfect. I was just gonna ask you.
So the definition for nostalgia is basically looking into the past, often like tied with the perception of different eras, maybe a little bit more simple, more joyful. It evolved in like conceptually, actually, initially associated with homesickness or a powerful emotional state that is significant psychological implications. So, like, you have basically get into like an emotional bank of your memory and history. And the realm of advertising is obviously sentimental values, and obviously you can use different tools for that. Brands seek to establish profound connections with their consumers, and they use nostalgia as a technique. And by strategically tapping into these memories, you create warm feelings, and advertisers obviously use that.
Yeah, I was gonna adjust the definition a little bit because the tricky thing about nostalgia is it's not necessarily your own memories. Sometimes you just have an affectation. Like I have a friend who really loves the 80s. He's not in his 40s, as you can tell.
Yeah.
But he really loves that aesthetic and the synth pop and, all of the old school movies. And he really lived that lifestyle. He used to dress like Don Johnson from Miami Vice, even. Yeah. So it's you can have a certain expectation of a previous era, and that can filter through as nostalgia for you as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own experiences or your own memories.
Yes, and I have a few examples as well how nostalgia can be not only generational, can be cultural, it can be the same as collectivistic or individualistic experience of nostalgia. As you mentioned, for him, it was more individualistic because he didn't live there. There's no people around him that maybe do that, but he's like, I love this. For me, this is like feels like the past, and like it's more maybe like a fashion trend.
Yep.
So yeah, but basically, initially, nostalgia. Uh, as defined for marketing is using homesickness as a powerful tool in advertising that brands use obviously to increase loyalty. And the big thing, for example, what brands do, they're like, oh, remember back in the past, we're bringing this thing back, it was so great back then. You're like, oh yeah, it was great back then. And basically, like, maybe it wasn't, but you don't know. But because you have a feeling, a warm feeling of nostalgia that it was, even though it maybe wasn't, you feel more loyalty and relatable to the brand that does that.
On the point of the thing you just said, a lot of times people will be like, "Oh, it's like the '50s," and they have this like really romanticized vision of the '50s or something like that, and oftentimes they'll link to like a advertisement that shows like a guy with a white picket fence or mowing his lawn while his wife makes lemonade or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And that entire conception is not based on reality either. That's the other part that we should also stress, that it's about perception. It's not about the actual history or actual experiences. It's just a warm feeling you get from an either induced or real memory, but most often induced memory.
That's true. And I have even here like navigating the past with caution, right? So potential downsides and risks of using nostalgia. So obviously, as you said, like it's overly romanticized, right? So past cultural touch points may have outdated or problematic connotation causing offense, right? You also review products that might not seem nostalgic. So like it can lead to disappointment. So you're like, well, back then it was better, but then maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I remember this is less about marketing, but more of a, I guess it's political sloganeering. Somebody would say, "Oh, wasn't it better for women in the 1950s when they didn't have to compete in the job market?" And I just thought to myself, there used to be ads in the paper where they used to advertise "Mommy's Little Helper." You know what that was?
What was it?
It was an anti-depression pill.
Whoa.
So it was so common. It had like this little cute nickname, and the women were just buzzed out of their minds trying to like stave off the loneliness of sitting at home and doing the same routine over and over again. So I'm very the anti that kind of nostalgia. And so, which brings me to this point, which is there are two types of mental approaches to nostalgia.
Go ahead.
One is reflective nostalgia,
Never heard about it. Tell me what it
and
is.
the other is restorative nostalgia. Okay,
So
reflective nostalgia is you think about a thing, but and you get either a warm feeling, but it's even-handed.
Mhm.
And restorative nostalgia is when you actively seek to recreate that thing.
wow, okay, why would I do that? Why would I seek to recreate? Because of the warm feeling of nostalgia?
Because the warm feeling, it can be very it can be very pleasing to sort of do that. There will restorative nostalgia. I mean, this is us getting way deep, but restorative nostalgia is often linked towards fascist movements.
Why?
Because think about it, they always talk about make X country great again and making this thing. There was a idealized, imagined past where things were fantastic,
Yeah.
and you're trying to restore that. Like it's a researcher did this entire. I forget her name, but and I'd love to credit her because so much of my bachelor's thesis does owe to that. But she talked about an uptick in nostalgia usually means a high stress environment.
I've read it somewhere. I don't know where, but for some reason, I know that.
Yep. So, going back to my bachelor's thesis, it was mainly about I sent questionnaires to a whole bunch of movie fans, people who watch a lot of movies, and I sent them two parts. One was their tendency towards nostalgia, which is the nostalgia index. They fill out a bunch of questions, and then from that index, you can figure out how nostalgic they are,
Uh-huh.
just mentally, how prone they are to that feeling. And the second part was I linked them to a medical stress survey
Mhm.
so they could detail their mental stress. And I found a correlation that if you're more stressed mentally, the more prone you are to being nostalgic. And the movies part was this. I also interviewed them about their taste in movies. And they would watch a lot of remakes. They would watch a lot of their childhood movies over and over again. They'd be very enthusiastic about watching movies that were based on properties from their past.
Makes sense. Like, I used to watch this with my family. This makes me feel very
It
nice.
gives you that
Or-
warm
like,
feeling of, childhood again. And like the most the toxic version of this is when it's used in political rhetoric. I remember a time when.
I literally have this quote written down.
Yeah, yeah. But I could go very deep into this topic. We're sticking to the marketing side of it.
Yeah, for me, the techniques invoking nostalgia in advertising, I categorize them into three parts. And when I had my propaganda class back in university, we also had a lot of videos from like Second World War, how it was done in Nazi Germany, and it was split into three parts: music, imagery, and cultural references. So I'm not gonna read all of them, but I'll give a few examples just to kind of give everyone a point of the techniques that evoke nostalgia in advertising. That's music that strongly invokes memories due to linking, to auditory systems. So you had like, if you listen to the music when you were growing up as a teenager, like that's the best music for you.
Yeah, I've even got an example of this.
Uh-huh.
So when you watch a movie trailer nowadays, or at least a year ago, I don't know what they're like now, but there would be like a slowed down oldie classic done in like a epic way. You've seen these trailers, haven't you?
I think
Where
so.
somebody will put Rolling Stones as painted black and just it'll be slow and kind of different. But it will, or they'll put the Beastie Boys. The Star Trek trailer had that the last movie they released, for example, and that's all playing on sort of what people associate as being nostalgic and what people associate with their childhoods.
Even when they did not live back then as well. So now with music, they remixing. For me, I am going through these phases of like, oh, that old song is so boring. Let me listen to this remixed version of the old song, which feels fresh, but then I'm like, I still have the elements of the old song. I don't know. There's so many remixes of like ABBA that I'm listening to, which are into more like house music, and I'm like, this feels warm, even though I was not even born back then.
So here in the Netherlands, what do you think are the concerts that make the most money?
Have well, I don't know. Besides the hardcore, I don't know, house music.
No.
Disco.
There's a particular type of concert for the over 40s
Wow, I should join.
that that is essentially bands going up and playing like cover songs and of like the classic sort of Dutch memorable sort of things from like the 80s or 90s.
Lager.
Not even Schlager, but just sort of like Dutch pop from the day. When I was young, this stuff makes so much money. It makes more money than a lot of the big concerts that we see over here. And because people go to it regularly, they go for a good time. They go there and just drink their asses off, you know.
That's true. When I was playing in the bands of Lithuania, I played jazz and I played, well, like pop music. And we always said, why, someone asked, like, why do you play this garbage, right? Because you could play like Rolling Stones and something like that. And we're like, well, if everyone knows a song, it's a good song. If no one knows a song, it's a bad song. So we kind of did it this way, that people who like, oh, I know Maroon 5 because that's a very popular whatever song, so we play that because that's what generated money. So basically the music is one of the things that is being used by brands as well. So you have music videos, or basically brands are creating ads that use that nostalgic songs from the past, like you said in the movies. So people have strong emotional bonds with music for their 16 to 19 years old. That's where your nostalgia is actually being built, because that's your teenage years when you're probably more impressionate and emotional and disbalanced.
Oh, it's the first time you're actually conscious of your own decisions.
Maybe that's the point.
As a child, you're just kind of so much of that just disappears back in the head. But then the formative experiences are the teenage years, where every year feels like something new is happening to you.
Yeah, the second part, the second category is imagery. So images, colors, words that are used in the past, they create emotional links. So brands, they visit their history with vintage logos, fonts. For example, Coca-Cola is associated with like Christmas and the truck and the Santa Claus, and like, oh yeah, this is what's gonna work.
I have a theory about this.
What?
I think an image has to be a very good image for us to feel nostalgic about it, because we are very good at deconstructing images very easily, and we get bored of images very easily. But the cheap little jingle can trigger so much more nostalgia much more effectively.
I have a jingle here as well.
There you go.
Yes, in one I skipped it because it's a very long list, but jingles, yeah, are also included.
Yeah, and this with music, it's kind of different. The simpler the melody, the more memorable it'll be. And music isn't as direct in our senses. Like it's much more abstract.
Mm-hmm.
So we can associate our own a thing to it. It's like a Rorschach test. You can associate your own emotions to it. And we do have parameters, certainly. If it's in a minor key, you're going to tend to feel like it's a sadder song. If it's in a major key, you're going to tend to feel like it's this and all that. But a really simple melody can be so broad within that range that you'll feel your own set of emotions, and another person will feel their own set of emotions, not in a way that an image would. An image with a face on it, for example, you'll be interpreting the expression on that face, for example. So it's not abstract enough. So the indirect senses have a major part to play in nostalgia.
I mean, it makes sense, right? I have somewhere here as well that each generation has its own like parameters for nostalgia. When TVs were not around, right, you would use radio and audio more. When then TVs got released, right, the next generation, they're already, oh, I can do also visual and an audio, and then whatever, or like a tangible nostalgia of like foods and stuff like that. It's like, oh, my mom cooked this when I was, young.
It's like that scene from Ratatouille.
Exactly.
Where the guy just eats the dish and just has this gigantic flashback. But just to be clear, we're not saying images don't induce as much nostalgia. No. It's images will induce a much more directed effect.
Yeah, they also like set colors. For example, from each generation, you had like specific colors. Now again, the 2000s fashion is here. I remember when I was like in middle school, I would wear these like white pants, and like big t-shirts. And then it's all about like skinny jeans and stuff. And then now it comes back. I'm like,
I think I think when I was a kid, the biggest thing in the world was just like a long sleeve shirt with a short sleeve shirt on top.
Exactly. Yeah, that is like the 2000s.
Peak 2000s fashion.
Dude, I had that.
And I wonder when it'll come back.
It already did. Like, look, everyone. Yes, like you're probably just not visiting the places, man. Like
I'm not saying young people.
maybe that's the thing. So yeah, like vintage aesthetics, old-fashioned props enhance the nostalgic experience. So revival of old posters and VHS covers connects with, for example, with millennials and Gen X. So those are the parts that can be a little bit more general. And then there's the third part, which is cultural references. So incorporating recognizable symbols from shared cultural experiences, right? If it's like a culture, like a country or a neighborhood, or if it's like a group of people, a bubble that you're in, understanding the target audience's cultural memories is crucial. That's as well one of the points.
I mean, the biggest marketing example for this I can think of is we have Pakistan has a prime minister that rode the wave of uh, his win in a cricket match in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
You know, the World Cup win, which is so crucial to a lot of formative Pakistani memories.
Uh-huh.
And that he's coasted off that his entire life, and then like he got elected on the basis of that being one of the big things that people really associate with him. And I know his supporters will be like, no, it's this policy and that policy. No, but you know this guy because of that.
Yeah.
You associate him with this sort of winning feeling.
Oh, that's very interesting as well. Here they also mention that obviously that brands, yeah, basically they have to craft their message towards a specific cultural experience that happens. In your case, you said that he won like a cricket match. Here, they also said it can be a nostalgic feeling from holidays, right? So, like, oh, remember when you were a kid and you were playing by the lake and stuff like that. So they use that in ads as well a lot, just to get that feeling.
It doesn't even have to be that. I have associations with Christmas, and I didn't have Christmas until like I turned into a late teenager when I left Pakistan.
There's a name for that. Younger audience can experience neo nostalgia for years they didn't even live through. So that's neo nostalgia. It becomes a trend at the same time, as well as piggybacking on the nostalgia. And they also said, how long does it have to be between the events to make it nostalgic? Can it be 3 months? Can it be a year? Can it be 20, 30, 40, 50 years? What is nostalgia to whom?
It really depends. Returning back to when I wrote my thesis,
Uh-huh.
15 to 40 years is the most common definition of the nostalgia cycle.
Yeah, like generational nostalgia.
But I just don't believe that a nostalgia cycle exists. I think like the cycle definitely exists, but I don't think a set period exists.
Yeah.
For some reason, I get nostalgic about the 1930s just because I watched a whole bunch of noir films. Right? I feel really weirdly nostalgic if I see an Alfred Hitchcock movie even, and I never lived through that. My parents barely lived through that.
This is where I go to like the Lindy Hop events, and then I see people dancing jazz and Lindy Hop, and then I'm like, wow, it probably was a nice time. Everyone dressed nice, they danced together, they were hanging out, there was no technology, and you're like, yeah, probably I would not survive in that.
But that's the thing. We perform nostalgia just like those Lindy Hop events. We perform it, and then that becomes more real than the image that we have. Yeah, than the actual history. I'd rather say the image that we have suddenly displaces that history.
Yeah, but this is your power of sentiment, right?
Yeah. Of course, nostalgia is entirely sentiment. To confuse it with history is to play a fool's game.
So this is So this is also there's a way it's called rosy retrospection. Amplifies effectiveness by tapping into idealized past.
Yeah.
So you take that moment from like ideal past where, for example, people are dressed up nicely and dancing together to the music you like, and you're like, well, that's your representation of that specific moment. It's called rosy retrospection. So it's like, I guess it's like you put your, pink eyeglasses or something like that.
Nostalgia is also really tied to another concept. I don't see many people tying it to it, but in my mind, they're very intrinsically similar. Are you familiar with the term hyperreality?
Yes. You told me, I think, in the last one of the previous podcasts about the guy who was basically wrote a book about people who watched how World War happened, right?
Yeah, that's The Gulf War Never Happened was the name of the book.
Yeah, here you go.
And so hyperreality generally displaces our vision of reality by building something that's emotionally more pleasing, but also not necessarily true.
Mhm.
So we impose a narrative over the past, and nostalgia is basically that, you know? So in nostalgia, what happens is you look at a certain event or a time period, and you might only see, for example, if you look at pictures from the 1930s, if you're not looking at history books, you might see these glorious, glamorous shots of people dressed well in like these tall Manhattan buildings. But what you're not, the context you're not receiving is most of those people were rich during the Great Depression. Majority of the people around them were probably suffering.
Yeah,
But the pictures are only taken of the glamour and the lifestyle, and pictures were more expensive back then, so only particular people could afford them.
fair enough.
So you get this, what's not shown in the picture is suddenly disregarded, you know?
Okay, I have as millennials who were born from 1981 to 1996, I have a few things that trigger nostalgia, and I want to see if triggers nostalgia in you.
Probably. Oh.
Sitcoms.
Oh yeah. I grew up watching all sorts of sitcoms, and then I started watching the sitcoms written by writers who used to watch that. My favorite example of this is a form of deconstructive nostalgia,
Uh-huh.
which is BoJack Horseman.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that entire show is about the sort of background pain happening behind the sitcom actor, you know?
Yes.
It contrasts his sort of sitcom life constantly with the kind of person he is and what kind of person actually wants to be portrayed as like that sitcom actor, you know?
When he was famous.
Yeah, no, there's so much nostalgia in that shit.
Yes, that's true. The other one is early video games.
Oh yeah. In fact, I have a theory that like the current movement of like synth pop is so video game based. They're all bit crushed sounds. They sound a little bit 8-bit, and there's these like almost like they've been written on an old 90s tracker program.
For me, the video games, now the ones I'm playing, they're all pixelated. Literally, the last 5 games I'm playing, all pixelated. I don't care about like this quality and speed.
Well, that's perfect because something happened there, right? That's when often nostalgia meets changing environments. And by that, I mean, we've gotten the ability to build a video game on a single computer nowadays. And it doesn't have to be particularly powerful, it doesn't have to be anything like that. So, all those games that used to require a lot more like effort and all these complex workarounds,
Mhm.
and a lot of the people who grew up on those old games may not own a gigantic studio, but they can make games like those on their laptop.
Yeah.
So they grew up with those, and they're trying to sort of recreating them with the means that they have.
I mean, that's pretty cool, but you're also saying I'm depressed playing old video games.
Oh no, maybe the person who made the games,
Oh, maybe.
but they're genuinely good games. Like
It's very good games.
Assault and Sacrifice was pretty cool.
I'm playing Noita. That was a very cool one.
I haven't played
The
that.
last one on the list is boy bands.
I used to dislike boy bands when I was growing up
Uh-huh.
because I was overly edgy metalhead,
Uh-huh.
and I've come back around on them. So I have a nostalgia I did not have about something that I didn't have positive impressions of when I was growing up.
You were like, I'm not following the mainstream trends. I'm gonna be
It's
alternative.
not dark enough for me.
Fair enough.
Where's the 8-string guitars on like heavy distortion?
Well,
Why doesn't this sound like Meshuggah?
I'll do a little bit of name dropping here as well. So the campaigns back from the, let's say, for millennials, they always reference analog to digital transitions. So they always try to build on that trend of like it was better back then, as you said, it's like, or entry to, I don't know, disco party, not disco party, party of the 2000s, no phones allowed. I was like, yes, just like good old days. And then some successful examples: Pokemon Go, Share a Coke, Nike sneakers like Nike Classic, Crystal Pepsi, which apparently they came back like 5 times. They do it every 5 years. revival. Spotify, never-ending story ads. Adobe used Bob Ross in their ads. Burger King used the old logos. Pizza Hut used the Pac-Man, and Nintendo classic games are like the ones that they are like re-releasing.
So on the note of analog versus digital, or analog transitioning to digital and then back,
Uh-huh.
vinyls are a perfect example of how nostalgia works often. So vinyl album sales are pretty decent part of a lot of what indie bands can make back. So a lot of them would have like a album release, but they'll make nothing off of Spotify because their total audience is pretty small, and then they'll have a vinyl release.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of that is sort of sustaining them, but it's also a sort of industry nostalgia, in that people are like, oh, there used to be a time musicians could like make better music, and there's a rejection of digital formats because of that. I mean, CDs were also coming back in like the public consciousness.
Dude, I don't even know. You wouldn't even have a CD-ROM in the
I
computers.
know, but people were buying like old Discmans.
Yeah, or like you can now buy like a connector to play a CD.
Yeah.
I have a CD at home for something. I'm like, I cannot even put it anywhere.
Yeah.
It's weirdly enough.
But yeah, the vinyl industry is pretty nostalgia driven,
Mhm.
but also in a practical way. I do rather like their approach to things, because it's more if you really support an artist, just buy their vinyl.
I agree with that. Well, now also in marketing, how they, because again, I'm mostly looking at, how marketeers and ads use it now. So there's actually measuring memory metrics and methods of like evaluating the effectiveness of nostalgic advertising. So you can track engagement metrics on social media, like obviously likes, shares, and stuff of specific content.
Before I forget, there's actually a different branch of nostalgia called tech nostalgia.
Oh, that's fun.
One word. Yeah.
Like nostalgia.
Yeah. So anything related with technology that you grew up with, that you suddenly have fond memories of, or so if you sort of feel like clicking around on software isn't quite as engaging
Like
for
a BlackBerry.
you, but the BlackBerry. But yeah, it's very very good. Yeah, it's like that impulse is that, oh, this is how I used to do things, and it kind of makes you more interested in the technology itself.
Mhm.
I find that for myself. I have so many analog synthesizers. You've seen my room.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I like the tactile feeling of it, and so tech nostalgia is a huge part of all of those sort of modern wave of new analog synthesizers that are like looking like old Euroracks and all these things. It's big in the music industry.
I'm thinking like, what would from the tech stuff, what would I go back to? And probably nothing. It's like I'm thinking phone, no, laptop, no, that's it. The end.
I don't know, Nokia. I saw a Nokia phone when I was trying to buy my new one.
Were you tempted?
I was like, "Ooh, this looks fun."
For like 5 minutes, you're like, this is just, I cannot do this.
Yeah,
This is my scare of like of switching to something old. But basically as well, coming back to the measuring memory. So obviously tracking engagements, analyze brand sentiment before and after the campaign, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Evaluation of the campaigns. You can also evaluate customer retention, and it's also based on all the research I did. It looks like that the retention from the nostalgia campaigns is always higher, because people who are loyal to a brand, they have already a perspective or relationship with it based on some historical, let's say, product that is related to the brand. And when they reactivate it again, let's say use nostalgia as a mechanism of advertising, it basically sticks back to them. And they're like, oh, yeah, exactly. This is why I love you, Apple, because you locked me into this, iPhone no button era. So basically, that's the interesting part. So you can calculate return on investment as well from those campaigns as you normally would. But obviously, if you use nostalgia, it has to be specific to that. Yeah, so those like a little bit of a list of measuring memory.
Yeah. It's interesting also that nostalgia in past isn't always as direct as you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, this happens in sci-fi a lot, and I've started calling it aesthetic retrofuturism.
All right, it's very complicated.
Yeah. So retrofuturism is already a term. And retrofuturism means when you set something in the future, but it has elements of the past.
Hmm.
Uh, so sometimes, if you ever watched the original Blade Runner?
Yes, I did a long time ago.
So there's a lot of like big screens and blah blah blah, and gigantic spaceships hovering around, but it also draws so heavily from old noir movies. That's kind of retrofuturism when you take when you take elements of the future, but you also have a mood or a central theme that's very like locked in the past.
The first thing I thought about was like Japan and Tokyo in some cartoons or movies is perceived like, oh, this is future tech, flying cars, and everyone's like, Yakuza is still drinking tea and using swords. You're like, aren't you like year 3500 and then they still use swords and there's Yakuza there?
Although that would be less nostalgia, because I don't feel like that's the emotional purpose of that. That's just sort of tradition carrying on.
Yeah, it's also like a reference, right?
It's got sort of like a cultural impression that people,
Blend.
yeah, which is also sort of like a strange cultural impression people have of Japan in general, that simultaneously they're in the future and simultaneously they're very traditional, right? So there's like that weird balance that they have.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think that's just a reflection of that. But retrofuturism can also be sort of like diesel punk movies, like that's you ever seen Cowboy Bebop?
Sounds familiar.
It's an anime, and it's very retrofuturist, because on the one hand there's spaceships, everybody's going to Mars and blah blah blah, but it so looks like a 1960s movie, a 1950s movie, and it has this jazz soundtrack that's almost anachronistic and completely different from what you would expect from a sci-fi show in the 2000s at least. And this entire vibe creates that retrofuturism, because it's simultaneously retro and also futuristic.
And that is something that's, well, I guess some people can relate to again, right? Because that's what's the main idea of these like a synthesis, right, of times. That's where you can chip into the feeling with the music, with the art style, with everything. So that's where you sell that entertainment.
But that's what I mean by not everything is apparently nostalgic. You know, sometimes it can be very subtly nostalgic with a new twist on it, like in retrofuturism or something.
Like a remix of the song.
Yeah, a remix of a song. Like what was that? David Guetta released just basically the song "Blue." You know, I'm blue, da da
Yeah.
da, but and just released it with different lyrics with the same melody, and it became a #1 hit. And you're just like, okay, that's '90s nostalgia.
Yeah, but you have
With
to blend it with the like a modern. You cannot just pull out a old like I see when you can pull out an old logo, but I cannot see you making things work again the same way it worked back then because we live in the modern times. You cannot pull a song from 40 years ago and make it successful again. Maybe you can, but adding a modern twist to it, you got to get not only old audiences,
You don't.
neo nostalgia, and also like basically new people who are going to be reopening the band.
Yeah, not necessarily. I think there was this guy who covered "Fast Car" by Tracy Chapman, and that's a song from the '80s or the maybe early '90s, and it went to #1. And he didn't particularly do much new with it. He just covered it like a country song, you know. And I think that you can either do it in a sort of new way. You can do it in a do nostalgia in a very subtle way, where it's just the theme and the mood rather than the actual content of the thing.
That as well, a twist.
Or you can do just an entire cover version. You know, there's multiple ways to go about it. So with some movies, you can just invoke nostalgia by putting a certain camera filter, right? Camera filters themselves actually are a pretty interesting nostalgia piece, because they're supposed to look like the old Polaroids.
Yeah,
Instagram's entire logo is based on that.
that's true. That's a fair point.
So yeah, but it's everywhere. It's currently everywhere.
Can you like remember what ad that triggered like a nostalgic feeling for you, made you buy something?
The only thing that came to mind is like those old Mountain Dew ads, really ridiculous ones. or like it's like some athletic nonsense going on,
Uh-huh.
and there's some or the Pepsi ad where you like a guy outruns a cheetah after.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
You remember that?
Yes. So those are the ones that like, oh yeah, I'm gonna run fast like a cheetah. Sonic, go fast.
The Old Spice ad is quite nostalgic for me.
Those don't. I feel that those don't change. Every time you watch it, like it feels like you've seen this a million times.
Nah.
For me, at least, like that's the feeling I get. I'm like, like it feels similar, but old similar.
Hmm. What else?
So what would you then say your like biggest nostalgic element, music, visual, or some references that you like resonate mostly with?
I think for me it would be old movies.
Old movies. So like the visual and the
I
music together. So
actually really love a throwback to old movies, especially if something's like slightly old Hollywood looking.
uh-huh.
You know, one of the reasons I do like Blade Runner is because it has those noir elements,
Mhm.
even more than sci-fi elements. I think, still controversially enough, but then I love a movie that's just shot in black and white in the old times or something, you know, and it has nice gloss put on it. It has like people putting in an effort to interpret an old sort of affectation. I like those. Lots of them set in the 70s. I love a weird uh 70s style. Uh, anything pre-phone.
Fair.
Anything pre-mobile phone is very interesting to me.
Well, just like a typical millennial.
Yeah,
Maybe a little bit even, I did not read that through, but there's also like Generation X. Those are the ones that are incorporating 80s and 90s trends, music, and products. Basically, nostalgia for their formative years, like when they were effective. I don't know why they say it this way. They have significant purchasing power and value for authenticity. Maybe that's what you mean by not having phones. So it's authenticity. Campaigns can highlight product quality and content with the past experiences, appreciate work life balance. And they're basically successful examples of ads are Microsoft Child of the 90s, Motorola Razr. Actually, they re released that not so long ago. Disney 90s and 80s music. Pepsi Show. That's what you just literally said.
No.
So yeah, those are. You're more of Gen X slash millennial.
I grew up in Pakistan, so everything came to me a bit later. We
Fair
lived the
enough.
Gen X lifestyle as millennials.
Fair enough. There was a very interesting connection that actually Gen X is with some values really connects with Gen Z. So there's a lot of overlap with like value authenticity and also like being like this super motivated at some points. And millennials are like this transitional generation of like nostalgia sucks, everything's bad.
We're sort of like the sort of like people who've gone through too many upsets in life. Like with millennials, I think the second we went off to university and stuff, we were like hit with the worst economic crashes.
They're like 2008. Oh, how cool it is to live only one time through an economic crash. Then COVID, then war started. You're like, yeah, how many first times can it be?
Our primary trait is that we're just tired, you know.
I think like this is the transition. We're just tired.
The Gen Zers, they've never known a better world, so they're not tired yet.
And Gen X, they had just like more money and success back then because nothing
They
existed.
just sit around saying, "Why don't you buy a house?"
I find myself more of like new nostalgia, neo nostalgia situation. I feel like I don't have a lot of this nostalgic feeling towards ads or items or something like that. But I like when they say, hey, this was reinvented from the old product or from an old commercial TV show. I feel like I appreciate that. It's not like I relate a lot, but my appreciation for, let's say, the music, the ad, or the movie when it's a remake comes to like I like that more. So if I compare it to some other people, it's like, oh, it's not the original. I'm like, doesn't matter. I like this one. Or like, oh, that's not the classic. Is like in the classic it was different, or in the book it was different. I'm like, I don't care. I do find myself more in the new nostalgia or neo nostalgia camp, because I don't know, because I feel that I'm very modern and like reinvent, like, but I also grew up with the some of the old songs or old products that I've seen that I don't have, maybe because I was poor.
Yeah.
I didn't have a relationship to that, but now if I can afford myself a Pepsi or a Coke, I have a new relationship with having the old knowledge, and that's where again
Hmm.
the new nostalgia, neo nostalgia feels much better.
You actually brought up a topic I want to talk about because nostalgia can have drawbacks when you try to use it as an affect.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when you remake a movie, but you change certain elements of it, people
Mhm.
get very angry.
Yeah, fair. This is where this is again the two camps.
So you really have to struggle for that authenticity factor.
Uh-huh.
If it doesn't feel authentic, people will just be like, well, you're just cashing in on my childhood.
Yeah, but also like focusing too much on the past can make like brands or ads seem a little bit out of touch in
Yep.
like what is happening now. Like they re-released Barbie movie and they're like, oh, this is really gonna cater to everyone who grew up in the 90s, and then there's like a backlash, and because they made like a twist that was like sexist and misogynistic and stuff like that, so
Right.
they put a twist to it to give it a modern feel, so they attracted people from the old and from the current age, and they're like, here you go, this is gonna be a perfect mix. But what happened? It became a divide on some forums.
Same.
So it's very interesting when they did this nostalgia washing as well,
Mm.
when it's like they just push on like you know, superficial overuse of like what happened back in the days was better, or using a negative sentiment in this overuse of nostalgia. So kind of overemphasis on nostalgia can also be like a downside, right? As you said, hey, they emphasize that it's going to be just like the classic, just like it was back then, and in reality the new remix, the new movie is not going to be that fun, and that's the risk.
Yeah. But another drawback of nostalgia is that if you're going to use it, it's sort of tough to recreate the emotions, and not everyone may be able to associate them.
Yes, fair enough.
So, for example, if I try to, you just seem like a boomer talking about the old days, Haythams, yeah? If I go to a kid and try to talk about, like, this used to be a Motorola Razor. Like, what are you talking about?
Old man, go home, get into your rocking chair.
But Motorola did release a new Razor. Did it do well? I don't know.
I also don't know, but sounds fun.
Yep. Uh, so that's an interesting one. The other thing is nostalgia is an emotional affect. You can't use it to paper over something that's bad.
True.
The end product has to be pretty good.
That's true. Well, it's, again, you can squeeze out only as much out of it before it becomes overused and bad. So from my side, the conclusion after like reading all of this and also talking to you now, so I didn't know about, you know, different parts of nostalgia, because I kind of put it into more the advertising side. So kind of understanding this nostalgia can really help you to like create a, let's say, a nice product, nice ad, or something that you can use in marketing, or even just like in your life, right? Like appreciate life more. Um, and nostalgia remains still like a timeless strategy because you can always come back to it, which is pretty weird to me as well. Because like in 20 years, I imagine us like in 30 years, we're like 70-year-old dudes and we're like, remember back in the days when Coca-Cola Santa Claus came to your house and did that, whatever. So it was anyway, it's very interesting to me that like this is such a timeless strategy that you could come back to it and you can have so many individual or collectivistic or cultural references of nostalgia.
Yeah.
So for me, that's like that's my takeaway.
Yeah, in the end, I think the main advice is stick to 15 to 40-year gap, but there are no concrete rules on that. You can get nostalgic about like the 1920s for some people.
You can get nostalgia about the things that you did not even live through, which is again new nostalgia or neo nostalgia.
You should research the color palettes of the time. You should research the sounds. You should research how people talked to invoke these sorts of feelings. There's a lot of like research involved. You can't just slap it together with like a Instagram filter.
When you used to, but not anymore.
And I guess it's a really powerful tool, but I also think it's wearing itself out. Because one of the big things that I wanted to talk about was how in Hollywood most movies are that are talked about in general media are remakes or sequels and things like that. Sequels for like franchises that have been going on for like twice as long as I've been alive. So it creates a glut of repackaging and recycling stuff, and there are people who get tired of that.
Most will, right? In the age of information now, the split is probably going to be even more, right? Because there's more groups. It's hyper personalization. Everyone has their own nostalgia in a way. So I feel maybe that will be by releasing more stuff or re-releasing things is going to make it much more complicated as well to use nostalgia. But for like bigger groups or like on generalization, I think it's still quite nice. Thank you for listening, everyone. If you want to follow us, like and subscribe, and also we're actually uploading this podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music if you want to listen. What else? We got some pretty cool comments last time on TikTok. Guys basically agreeing and disagreeing with us, so that was very fun. And yeah, enjoy, have fun. If you want to communicate with us, just reach out.
Yeah, have a good time. See you guys.
Ciao.